Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your critique of the week. It's Friday, September 6th. Thanks so much for joining me. We are streaming live on Facebook and YouTube. I could not get Twitter to load, or X, or whatever you want to call it. Maybe I'll give it one more shot as I talk. But yeah, there's a problem loading this content. Something's wrong with X, but that's alright. I can't see the comments on X anyway, so I guess it doesn't really matter. One more time. Nope, error creating broadcast. Something's going on with the old X. But that's all right. You are here wherever you are. Thanks so much for joining me. Let's see. We've got great crew on hand, as we always do. We've got Chelsea McClellan's here, Monica Dobos, Dee Coleman, Mark Grenier, Cindy Guntherman, James Langford, Rebecca Kate, Morgan Feeney, Maney is here, Winston Munn, Dick Westheimer, Tara Meslick McMahon. Good to see ya. We got Michelle Noble, Dr. Q, Amy Dower Solorzano, Brian O'Sullivan, today's poet of the day on rattle.com. We got Tom Barlow, Brandis Askin, Nate Jacobs here, Nancy Tennell, Morgan Feeney, Jack McKay, Jamie Thomas, Sharon Ferrante. We're going to be looking at some Tonka from Sharon in the second half of the hour. Annie Blanchard is here, Ali Rowland, Katie Dozier downstairs. We've got Hemant Malik. Yeah, so yeah, great. As always, so much fun to do these critiques. Now, the point, as always, is to give that workshop experience where we let people know what we think about their poems so they can help figure out what's working and what's not. It's the real way to grow as a writer. So leave as many comments as you would as we go through these poems. If you'd like to submit poems and participate in the critique that way, all you have to do is go to rattle.com/critique. You'll find that in our header and things like that, our menus. To go to rattle.com/critique and submit 2 poems. And if you're someone who participates and helps other people out with the comments, normally I'll bump you up to the top. If not, we'll start at the bottom and go through. We kind of alternate week to week. And this week we do have some regulars. So Laura Buxbaum is somebody who's been joining more and more frequently lately, especially on the Rattlecast. So we thought we'd look at her poems. And of course, our friend Sharon Ferrante, who has some wonderful haiku all the time, has some Tonka that she submitted. And I'd love to talk about Tonka because I don't think we ever have on the critique. Haiku is sort of a popular form that's frequently misunderstood in literary circles, but the Tonka even more so. And so we're going to take a look at those Tonka from Sharon Ferrante in a bit. But first, let's see. Let's take a look at what we've got. And yeah, I should say too, what was the... All right, well, let's take a look at Laura Buxbaum first. Okay, so here's Laura's poems, a recipe, and it's about a page, a little over a page, and then a slightly shorter poem. And let's take a look. So this is Laura Buxbaum once again. I looked back at her notes, and she did not ask any questions. If you submit for the critique of the week, am I turning this the right way? If you submit for the critique of the week, you will see a little field where you can ask any questions if you have any specific thing you want to know about. And there's nothing there for Laura, so just take a look at these poems and see what we've got. Again, this is Laura Buxbaum. Recipes. Running in the woods today, I heard the barred owl demand, "Who cooks for you?" And I thought of the recipes of my childhood. Mostly, they were from the joy of cooking. I think of my mother as a creative cook, but strangely, what I remember are the plain and comforting meals, sloppy joes, hot dogs, and beans. Every Christmas, though, popovers rising lightly above the muffin tin drenched with honey butter. She didn't bake often, but she taught me to make a pie crust. The secret Irma taught us is the ice water. In my souffle phase, I learned to make the bechamel, or pastry base. Then add ingredients. The ingredients I pleased for chocolate or cheese. Sorry about that. Bechamel? I'm wondering what that... I'm sure that's something that I just don't know how to say, and I'm weird for that, but anyway. When my mom went back to work, we took turns with dinner. My youngest sister's repertoire, limited then to burgers and other easy stuff. My ambitious brother, Asian dishes, flourless torts, bouchée de Noël with meringue, fungus, and jelly moss. Why can't I remember what my other sister, now dead, would cook? Dad's special recipes, potato bread, Greek potatoes. The potatoes cook in water and olive oil with a whole lot of lemon juice and oregano. You keep cooking them to let the potatoes suck up the juice and flavor. Let the water boil down till the potatoes roast puffed and moist and crunchy. I add feta. We always had dessert. Why is that? Funny, that's something I let go of. Baked apples with cinnamon, a scoop of ice cream, raspberries and cream, broiled bananas with brown sugar. Who cooks for you? So that is the Laura Buxbaum's first poem, Recipes. And I don't know, so Recipes, it's one of those label-ish titles that lets us know sort of where we're going with the poem. And I like the beginning of it. I like running in the woods today. I heard the barred owl demand, who cooks for you? And I like the intro to that, but I wonder, that didn't come back into the poem at all. It was like the impetus for the poem. It was the Madeleines or whatever from Proust, that sent us back thinking, who cooks for you? But we never had any way that came up again, really. And I think one of the things, it's a nice frame that's set up for the poem. So why not bring that owl back? It's a good way to transition from into and out of the scenes and thoughts. We can always, as we're talking about, we do have a kind of list feel to this poem because we have the mother's recipes. Then we have, who is next? My youngest sister, my other sister, then dad. So we have this sort of this, then this, then this feel. And what that owl as a device can do is bring us back so we have a nice way of telling and hearing the story. So if every time, every once in a while we can turn back and say what the owl does, the owl hoots again. We can make it kind of a refrain that brings us back to the present moment of running in the woods. And then we can sort of tease out more emotion through that frame, I think. So that's the first thing I would suggest is bring that owl in because I mean, except for at the end again, just coming straight off another recipe, the owl doesn't come back. So I think, building that in, is the first thing I'd think about doing for this poem. But let's look at it in a little more detail. Make these, for me personally, you can't see them. I'm going to make these windows the right size because they're a little bit... Okay. So running in the woods today, I heard the barred owl demand, who cooks for you? And I thought of the recipes of my childhood. Mostly they were from The Joy of Cooking. And this should be italicized because it's the title of a book or a series. I think of my mother as a creative cook, but strangely what I remember are the plain and comforting meals, sloppy joes, hot dogs, and beans. So I like, this thought that what I remember are the comforting meals. I'd like a little detail in the description maybe of those. So there's an opportunity to describe them, make us taste it, We have 5 senses, and it's often we don't use it. Winston Munn says, is it a barred owl or barn owl? I think there's a barred owl too, right? I think those are 2 separate things. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's spelled right too. And if you want to take a look here, this is what a barred owl looks like, by the way. There you go. I wonder if there's a barred owl, B-A-R-D. That would be interesting too, but I doubt it. Let's see. Barred owl. Nope. There should be a barred owl though. It'd be great for poetry. Anyway, I would like to see some more detail from Sloppy Joe's hot dogs and beans. I mean, we could really feel and taste and smell. You don't sell the steak, but sell the sizzle. That kind of concept. If we could sort of feel these comfort foods cooking, the poem would be more vivid. I think it's a real opportunity to describe that in a little more detail. Every Christmas, though, popovers rising lightly above the muffin tin. See a detail like that. I like the rising lightly above the muffin tin, drenched with honey butter. She didn't bake often, but she taught me to make a pie crust. The secret Irma taught us. And I don't understand Irma versus the she. So it's a side, instead of adding something, feels a little confusing. So I would cut that because we don't have, I don't believe, another name in the poem. Irma doesn't come back. So that aside just makes me wonder who's Irma. Yeah, so I think cutting that out just for clarity to make us not wonder. The secret is the ice water is fine. In my souffle phase, I learned to make the bechamel. I hope I'm saying that right. Or pastry base. Then add the ingredients I pleased for chocolate or cheese. And so here, so at this point, we thought about the mom. Here's a good place we could go touch, the barred owl can be like a kind of touchstone. And also, why the barred owl? Why that specific kind of owl? Is there some reason why, that we could say, they're, I'm trying to look really quickly at one of the pages to see if there's any interesting details. We could pull in some of the details of where these owls are, what their lives are like, how do they treat their young, you know? If you pull those things in, we can get more of the actual heart of this poem to come to the surface, I think. So thinking about that and how you can bring that owl back in is interesting, and what that could be a metaphor for, because it feels a little deeper than just the owl reminded me of recipes, you know? Okay. Yeah, when Mom went back to work, we took turns with dinner. My youngest sister's repertoire limited then to burgers and other easy stuff. My ambitious brother, Asian dishes, flourless torts, bouchée de Noël with meringue fungus and jelly moss. And that's interesting, too. I mean, those are good details there. Why can't I remember what my old other sister, now dead, would cook? And, of course, this is like the heart of the poem. You know, the sister now dead, the other sister. Why can't I remember that question? And I feel like maybe the question is asked too bluntly because it's not really answered. And so what we did was we found like what we're curious about within the poem. Like that's where the mind wandered to. But what else could we do with it? Why did this come up and what does it mean? How does it all connect? And that's the question we should be answering, maybe not directly by asking it in the poem. But getting at the heart of this is really what we want the poem to be about, because that's the thing that's going to be most moving and memorable, and the one that you needed to say. You know, poems are a thing you need to say, or a problem you need to solve, a connection you need to make. And there's something going on there that we don't really get, because we move, instead of going into the dead sister, we go into Dad's special recipes, potato bread, Greek potatoes, the potatoes cook. And so at this point, I'm like sort of bored with lists of food. I want more of the actual story, and we don't get that. You keep cooking them to let the potatoes suck up the juice and flavor, let the water boil down till the potatoes roast, puffed and moist and crunchy. I add feta. So the list of ingredients is good, and add feta if it was just a poem about that, but we know it's not a poem about that, and we know it's it wouldn't hold up as a poem if it was just about that. So we know there's more to it, you know. So how do we get this? How do we get going on this? How do we get that cooking? No pun intended. We always had dessert. Why is that? And see, this question, why is that we always had dessert? It makes this question feel less important. This is sort of a irrelevant question. I feel like we're just way off the trail of what the poem is actually about once we get to this question here. Funny, that's something I let go of. Baked apples. And I'm wanting, the whole time I'm reading this, I'm wanting to get into that actual story. And we don't, so I'm sort of disappointed with the list and the recipes. You know, we want to figure out what's actually going on, what's at the heart of this. Scoop of ice cream, raspberries and cream, broiled bananas with brown sugar. Who cooks for you? And the who cooks for you, if it was a refrain, like I said, coming through the poem, that might mean something else, but I'm not quite sure where that went or why. We passed over the sort of the heart of the family dynamics that we feel like we want to be reading about. Let me see what everybody else is saying. There's a lot of talk. I should say, too, Jenny Middleton is over on Facebook. She has trouble logging into YouTube and always has great comments. She says, I think the owl is hidden in the wisdom of the older recipes and older relatives that have passed their sounds on. Yeah. One interesting thing about owls, though, which I always find interesting since I learned this, is that they're actually among the dumbest birds there are. And it's sort of ironic that they're considered wise because, and I guess because they have eyes and they just stare at you, but they do that because they're so dumb. You can't train them. They're nothing like corvids. They don't learn anything. They don't learn songs. They're just prey animals. They chase something in the same way like a cat does. If it runs, they chase it. That's kind of all the owl does. So that's an interesting fact, too, that might be brought in. Margaret Doyle says, I'd love to see the barred owl again, like a thread of fairy tale in the poem. Lovely memories. Yeah. Let's see. Brian O'Sullivan says, could there be a way to create less of an expectation of a narrative poem? Let it be a lyric poem meditating on family and food? The refrain idea might help with that. Let's see. I see some people agreeing with Dry Amontillado, but I'm trying to find the comment that they're agreeing with. Let's see. Where did that go? Oh, there we go. Those potatoes sound delicious. Is that what? Yeah, I guess they do. Yeah, so Morgan Feeney says, can we lean into the food so they're less listy and more a metaphor? What do the potatoes mean? Yeah, that's exactly the thing I was getting at, too. And Michelle Noble says it's the owl coming back and the sound of to-woo, to-woo. Yeah, Dr. Q says we get Irma's name. I feel like I need the name of the sister. Yeah. And Chelsea McClellan says sometimes the hardest horses to train are that way because they're the smartest. That's interesting. Well, I mean, there's an evolutionary reason, because if you're not a social animal, and they're very singular. They live very individualistic lives. Then you don't need to have all the intelligence. So much of intelligence is social, And so it's the social birds that are intelligent. They have to learn complicated songs. They have complicated gestures. They have to, coordinate their flight, all that kind of stuff. So that requires intelligence. And the owls, it's just a need-based growth, a need-based niche to fill. And you might as well use your other resources on bigger, sharper claws. Yeah. Tom Barlow says, perhaps we need a little taste of mouse. That would be a good, what does the owl do besides for just be there? Could the owl do something, Amy Dower Solorzano says, I'm interested in the recurrence of the question in the final line. The speaker has to let go of their family's dessert custom, but I wonder what else can help us leap from the past to present. Who cooks now? So that's a really good question, too. So I thought hopefully we've got some ideas for this poem, because the poem feels sort of like it's spinning around itself and hasn't found the heart of why it was written yet. And to me, it feels like we had an impetus, we had an impulse to move into the poem, and then we found it, but they sort of fled it after we found it. We didn't come back to that question. And what is it that's going on here with a backstory? As Nancy Snell says, the more I look at it, the more I want to know why the dead sisters' foods are not remembered. I mean, exactly. So I think tell that story, because we all want to hear that story. Yeah. Nate Jacob says, but food as a motivator for poetry is powerful stuff. The list is powerful in the way the items evoke memory and reaction in us all, but I want to find the poet carried somewhere surprising. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. A lot of comments. So thanks for sharing all these comments. Oh, Tom Barlow points out that there's a food poem issue of Rattle coming up. Yeah, it's going to be the first in a long time. We had a love poems issue, which is sort of topical. I tend to steer away from topics, but we got to branch out a little bit and try it. So we're going to have poems about food for the first time coming up next summer. Yeah, so Rebecca Kate says, overall, the poem makes me think of how we use food to avoid deep feelings of grief, or like grief. And yeah, and so if we dig into that, then I think the poem would be interesting. And there are, like I said, there are certain places where we could use more detail, but there are a lot of really nice descriptions of the food. And so there's sort of all this sort of like scaffolding for the poem to climb up to some elevated height where we're really learning something and gaining some understanding of humanity from it. So we just need to kind of climb it and see how high we can get and what we can do up there. As James Langford puts it, why write this poem? It seems like the dead sister would be the why, but as you say, no expansion on that point. Yeah. So I think we're just sort of saying the same things over again for this one. This isn't a poem where it's like line by line there's an issue. Although we could talk about, I think the line breaks, or there's a sort of inconsistency to them, which would be, could be smoothed out in a way that, they don't serve a lot of function. I mean, that's one thing we could talk about. But maybe we'll talk about that in the other poem, because this one, it feels like diving into the details, but then not getting into the emotional heart of it is the main thing. So thanks for sharing this one, Laura. Let's take a look at the other poem. Here we have, and then against this, Laura Buxbaum once again, and the poem is Diminishment. The other day, my mother said maybe she can't play tennis anymore. Her heart's murmur is growing louder. She's peering down the days to an end that no longer seems unimaginable. When my father died, I told her, now I don't feel immortal anymore. She said, well, I still do. But she was only 83 then, and the murmur imperceptible. Now her days are diminished, but still she clings fiercely to each. When I was a child, all I wanted was to live in the woods with my own dog, who would be my fierce companion. Now I live in the woods with my lover and our dog, and nearly 30 years we've shared, a child, 4 dogs, music, each other's bodies. Mine's sometimes still foreign, but my heart murmurs to his still. Our days are diminished, but each is distilled. Tincture to sip with care. Today I walked in the woods with our dog, whose nose discerned their history. See who's been here. Dog, rabbit, deer, fox, human. My dull senses can't follow hers, but my heart fills with pleasure at the loud murmur of the river and the spark of sun on a puddle of ice. A tiny distillation of winter, tincture of joy. So that is, I love the ending, especially in this poem. That is diminishment. I think this poem both has a great ending and a great beginning. So I think the other day my mother said maybe she can't play tennis anymore. There's a directness to that we know what we're talking about right away. We have characters right away. We're sort of entering the poem pretty easily. It's a nice way to get to the poem because we know what we're talking about without a lot of buildup. And so, yeah. Hammett says the murmur again. Yeah. And Nancy Charles says many beautiful images. Michelle Noah says I can't follow where the mother comes in. So, and so this is a good example of a poem, I think, that started out in one place and then moved somewhere else that, subconsciously the thoughts were being pulled up by the thought. Your deeper emotions and more complicated feelings were being pulled up by this thing the mother said. So I think it's a good example of like a trigger and then exploring something poem. So the other day my mother said this, maybe she can't play tennis anymore. Her heart's murmur is growing louder. She's peering down the days to an end that no longer seems unimaginable. So I like that aspect of the poem. I told her, now I don't feel immortal anymore. She said, well, I still do. But she was only 83 then, and the murmur imperceptible. Now her days are diminished. And there's one thing here that's a little confusing. I think there's an incongruity here, right? The other day, my mother said maybe she can't play tennis anymore. But then she was only 33 then. So a few days later, and she's more than 83? Or is this when the father died, she was 83? I guess that's what it is. But it's a little confusing, the way we move through referencing time. So she said this after the father died, but she was only 83 then and didn't have the murmur. But now she has the murmur, so she can't play tennis anymore, and her days are diminished, but she still clings to each. But that's a lot of like spinning, kind of, and a lot of like moving and trying to remember where we are in time. So I think you could kind of, by, adding, but she was only 83 then and the murmur imperceptible. There's some details that are true and accurate, but don't help us engage with the poem and sort of we get lost in kind of detail. I don't know if we need to know those kind of details. Yeah. Annie Blanchard, though, says that seems clear to me. I think what happens a lot of times when you're reading is that you sort of, when there's an ambiguity, and there are a lot of ambiguities in the way that language works, especially the English language, but other languages too, to different degrees. You kind of pick a road to go down. You like when you come to an ambiguity, it's like a crossroad, and you have to sort of pick left or right, and you sort of spontaneously pick one, and then you're sort of stuck in that model for a while. And so I think that's what happened to me there, where I was a little confused at first because I picked the left road instead of the right. And I think that's what it means by saying community. It's a little too much work to try to tease that out if you think of it the wrong way. Yeah, so when someone says just say when she was younger, I think that's helps. See, some details are just over-detailed. Yeah, Amy Dower Solorzano says, I love the quiet, serene contentment in the poem. I like that too. So anyway, this is a good, besides for that little confusion, this is a good intro to the poem. I mentioned the line breaks in the last, and this is an example too, where they just don't feel, like if there's a reason to have lines this long, like why pick it to end there to her heart? Doesn't the poem feel cleaner to end here and have it, I'm not sure what, what's gained by not having it a more clean ending there. you know? And the she said's, it's for long lines, they're sort of split up in a way that seems arbitrary. And it felt like that with the last poem too. That given, when you have this much freedom to play with the lines, because you have a long length and you have a lot of variety in the actual length. I mean, it goes from all the way here, which is like half the page, to here, which is like the full page. So you have a lot of options. It's not like you're constrained to have a certain line length in this poem. You're being free with it. And so if you're being free with it, like some of the choices seem arbitrary given all the freedom you have. And so I'd think about just where the line breaks, how they affect the reading, and how they make the poem land is another thing. And I'd sort of play with them more and get a better plating of the poem experience, possibly. Jamie Thomas says, I thought it was to emphasize heart as part of tennis and also the murmur. And the thing with that, so having these long lines, one of the things long lines do is they make it feel more like prose, which in the poetry space was about prose poetry yesterday. But they make it feel more like prose, and so you're paying more attention to your imagination and the scene that's being built than the actual word play within the poem. And so unless you're doing that like all the time, it's something that really gets missed and feels a little off, even when it lands. And so it does. There's a way you expect maybe, to say her heart's not in it anymore, but then it's her heart's murmur is growing louder. And that works if the poem is like shorter, if the lines are like down here and it feels natural, or something like that. It feels natural. But with the lines this long and varied, it's hard to really play a lot with the language in line with this sort of long and varied. It feels very arbitrary, and so I would sort of pick a form that fits the poem better is kind of what I'm saying. And it is more of a narrative poem, so having consistency, and make it, make the line breaks you want in a poem like this, I'll put it this way, you want to make the line breaks not be noticeable. We shouldn't be thinking or talking about line breaks. It's a very narrative poem. We should just be lost in the moments of the poem. And instead we are like thinking like, why are the lines feeling this way? And then also, as Maney points out, and it's the exact same thing, but even stronger, where these gaps here. Like, this is a very narrative poem with really standard punctuation. And so what we want to do is get lost in it. And having, where you're playing with the view of the poem on the page by having these gaps instead of punctuation, that pulls us out of the thing you're trying to build, which is that magical, daydream state where we're like entering the poem and having the experience along with you. And so you want, in a poem like this, you want to have line breaks that are just unobtrusive, that don't make you think about them, because you want to get lost in the poem. And I think there's places in the other poems the same way. So just sort of be consistently casual with line breaks is how I would want to be with a poem like this. Okay. But we'll continue. When I was a child, all I wanted was to live in the woods with my own dog, who would be my fierce companion. Now I live in the woods with my lover and our dog. In nearly 30 years, we've shared a child, 4 dogs, music, each other's bodies, mine sometimes still foreign, but my heart murmurs to his still. And see, so we have the heart murmurs, and to his still is a strange break there, because it's such a connected phrase. And again, we have this type of structure where we're getting lost in the poem, and then we're pulled back in by having that really stark break there. And so I'd be a lot more smooth and simple with this. Let's see. Chelsea, wait, no. It's Morgan Fee says, I wonder if it would be too punny to have a tennis-related title like Love 15, or however tennis scores work. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Morgan, Tom Barlow says, change it to pickleball. Who doesn't laugh when they hear the word pickleball? That's true. I just proved it, yeah. And maybe that's the appeal of pickleball, because it sure doesn't make you break a sweat. No, sorry, Joe Parka, for that. But anyway, so let's see. So in this section too, what this poem has is a really nice leap, like I was saying. So we have the mother talking about tennis, thinking about death. Then we have this reverie back, and I think this section is the less engaging of the three, because we have the details of the mother here, and there's a lot to think about. And then this is sort of an overview of the life. But then we get to this last section. I think that's really wonderful, is what I want to point out. Tincture with a sip of care. So these are our days diminished, but each is distilled. Tincture to sip with care. So we're thinking about the days like that, and I think it's nice. Today I walked in the woods with our dog, whose nose discerned their history. So we have this, suddenly we have this dog in the nose. And that's just a really nice detail to run with, and she does. So who's been here? Dog, rabbit, deer, fox, human. My dull senses can't follow hers, but my heart fills with pleasure at the loud murmur of the river and the spark of the sun on a puddle of ice. Tiny distillation of winter, tincture of joy. And we use this word twice. And it's such a strange word. It's not a common word. And I would refrain from using it twice. But I like the other aspects of it. And I wanted to, I think it was Brian O'Sullivan earlier on said, why not more of a lyrical poem and less of a narrative poem? That is, less telling a story, more just living in metaphor and image in the self, right? And I think that's a good suggestion for this poem, because it does have this really interesting move. Again, similar to the owl, though, it was the mother playing tennis, and then it's this completely unrelated, dogs with the smells. And the question is, how can you condense and weave them together in a way that makes sense, where the transitions are working right? Tara Meslick McMahon says, I see a sonnet in here somewhere. Wonderful first and last line, I agree with Tim, but too much in between. And too much in between is a great way to put it, Tara. I feel like there's just like a lot of filler in here. And why not just find a way to connect these two, and then the poem is kind of complete. And so why not condense up the poem and find a way, just a bridge. And again, you can think of the owl, which was a great example of the way you can use a sort of a structural image to anchor it in time and let you move through time. Why not start with the dog? Today I walked in the woods with our dog, whose nose discerned their history. Start there. Let that memory come back of the mother, because that's what you're thinking about walking the dog through the woods, right? And so my mother said this. And then come back after thinking about the mother to what the dog actually smells. Who's been here? Dog, rabbit, deer, fox, human. And then you can end in this wonderful way. My dull senses can't follow hers, but my heart fills with pleasure at the loud murmur of the river. And you can use that murmur, tying it in with that. And if the poem was much more condensed and not written in this narrative structure, where we just sort of flowed quickly from the dog scene, the thought about the mother, back to the murmur and what's the dog smelling, I think that would be a great poem right there. So here the problem, it's kind of similar to the last poem, which is why we asked for two. We talk about tendencies. And there's a tendency to sort of get, too narrative when we could push the poem more directly through the image, if that makes sense. Yeah. Let's see. Somebody pointed out, and it was, I think, Holly Elliott, but my head was blocking it, sorry. About now her days are diminished, but still she clings fiercely to each. Yeah, and that's each day. Timberless says, Laura, there is much to admire. Hope you come away from this inspired. Yeah, I mean, there is a lot here. And one of the things to point out, too, is that both of these poems have real emotional heart and depth. You can sense that looking at both. We have this line, why can't I remember my other sister, now dead, would cook? We have that, there's this, grasping for something, And that's cool. Laura Buxbaum herself says, in real life, my mom actually does play pickleball now at 91. Maybe bring that detail in. I mean, those details are fun. But we have that, and we have this thought of the heart of this poem is the, now I don't feel immortal anymore. And then the mom saying, I still do. And the interplay between those two things, of course, the mom has much less time. And so there's an interaction between the two. And how do we explore that more? And I think not being able to understand is really well put with this comparison. The dog who could smell all these things, and my dull senses that can't follow. So there's a real lot going on in this poem. It's really interesting. so there's a real, real content here. It's just a matter of finding the right way to fit and tell the story. And I think we gave a lot of advice for that. So hopefully this is helpful, Laura, because there is good stuff here. A lot of great lines and real depth. Yeah. All right. Let's see. So, yeah, let's go to Sharon Ferrante's next. And now we have a short segment because the next up are Sharon Ferrante's tanka. And so tanka, so the tanka form is actually older than haiku. I don't know. We haven't talked about tanka, so I saw this and I wanted to pull it up. In tanka, it comes from waka, and then there's an older version of it that comes from China actually. And waka was the Japanese version of, I can't remember the word, but it actually means little song or small song. In the similar way, sonnet means little song. And unlike haiku, haiku is two worlds in one breath, like I like to say. There's sort of one thing juxtaposed with another thing, or one view of the thing juxtaposed with another view of it. There's two ways of looking at the world, two places in time and space that are pushed against each other in this one breath, short moment, and that cutting action between the two reveals insight in sort of the space around it. That's what haiku does. Tanka, and traditionally haiku, it's not 575 syllable. I'm not going to go over this over and over again. Watch Michael Dylan Welch's episode or any of the other episodes with haiku poets. It's not 575 syllable. It's 575 on, which are mora. It's a length of time. So it's more like a measure of time in music. Like imagine like you have, I'm not really good at music, unfortunately, but say you have 4 beats in a measure. It's almost like it's like 7 beats in 3 measures is kind of how the haiku works. Except you have 5, then 7, then 5. So there's like two silence measures in the first and last. That's kind of how it is. So you have this like, just rhythmically, as far as the rhythm of Moraic languages, you feel the sort of the absence, a little bit of space around the phrase too, and that's really the heart of the thing. So we represent that by doing a short, long, short usually in English language haiku. So tanka is 57577 in the original Japanese, and that's not syllables, it's own, but that gives you more space. And so what you do is you have a lot more of a story structure. It's almost like a little story in a little ballad form. They're sort of chanted in the Japanese tradition, and it's more of like a lyric poem, like more like a small lyric. And lyric and music are similar too. So it's that a lot more emotion is directly expressed. It's not just the two images cutting against each other. We get more story, we get more character in this brief little song, this little moment that's sung to us. And that's what a tanka really is. Sharon Ferrante said I don't hear to a syllable count, and you shouldn't. Nobody shouldn't hear to a syllable count. Because as I said, there's not syllables in the Japanese. But even if you were counting own, in English we wouldn't really hear it because we aren't tuned to that. And you could sort of think of it like short, long, short, but there's, modernism was a movement in Japan too, and Gendai haiku don't adhere to any own structure. We're free to play with it however we want and take what useful parts of the form are given to us. And so anyway, the point is with tanka, it's similar to haiku, but with that little extra space, those 2 extra lines, we get a little bit more room to have story. There's still usually a kind of juxtaposition. There's a lot more like hinges kind of in tanka. Before we look at Sharon's, let me look at there's a really good example from Rattle. Oops, not that one. Hang on a second. I should have had this like pulled up because I saw the tanka coming. Usually I don't look at these ahead of time, but you can't help seeing the tanka. And so this is the first tanka that comes up actually if you search tanka in rattle.com, and it's from this. Let me put this on screen. It's from the Ekphrastic Challenge, actually. And it's this textile art. It's sort of a quilt. I don't know if you can really see it very well on the screen, but it's a quilt landscape image, quilted together from found materials, actually, by Debbie McAfee. It's called Lonely Highway. No, it's called Highway 41. And the tanka she calls Lonely Highway because of the That's how we titled it, but there's really no titles like there are in haiku, so it's just the first line. But anyway, so lonely highway, the wheat fields of my childhood come back to me, the unrelenting crop my father beat me with, which is really powerful with that last line. I mean, that is a shock of a last line. You do not see it coming. But notice how we have the story, this little scene is being set up, and we have a hinge, kind of like, we have that pivot where one phrase, the unrelenting crop, is used both with this beginning, because you see the wheat fields, and the wheat fields are this unrelenting crop. And then the unrelenting crop my father beat me with is its own expression too. And so like one of those monoku very often, where you have the one word that works both ways and it's playing off that, a lot of times you have that in tanka. That's like more often than a cut that's a sharp cut like a dash. You have this overlap. And it's a way, so you can see the similarities and differences between tanka and haiku, if you know haiku pretty well, just from this poem. Because you have more structure, you have more storytelling going on. You have a character coming in. It's not just an image. And really two characters, of course, because the speaker is a character too, which is something that's not usually the case in haiku. So we have this little bit more room, which lets us get a little bit more story, but still a lot of the elements of haiku. So that's how tanka works. And it's interesting to talk about it because we really haven't, I don't think, on this on the critique of the week. So now that we've seen that and talked about that a little bit, let's go back to Sharon Ferrante's. And Sharon, of course, is a wonderful short form poet. The funny thing about Sharon, I don't think she realizes how good she is. Katie and I were talking about this before. She is one of the best poets around, really. Her poems are so good, and they're so short and tight and wonderful. She has a poem in the current issue of Rattle, a haiku sequence. She was the first prompt poet of the month for haiku too. She writes a lot of charitas, which are wonderful. And then she submitted tanka here for critique of the week. So let's take a look. Again, this is Sharon Ferrante. And we'll look at them one at a time, even though I put multiple. Maybe I should sort of hide the rest so you don't have to look. Okay. Analyzing the wine, my friend wants to see haiku. I open the window. Oh, maybe we'll read them all, and then we'll go one by one after that. That's probably better. Here, let's do that. Okay. So, analyzing the wine, my friend wants to see haiku. I open the window. The next one. I wonder, does she save for tomorrow the black butterfly on thistle? I watch you build your room to soft jazz, smooth the dance of a red spider. Sorry, I tripped over that. I watch you build your room to soft jazz, smooth the dance of a red spider. And the last one she sent, an antique rose, but then the turning point, she grabs the scarlet dress. So for tanka there, and you can see the structure, done really well that we've mentioned before. In each one, there is sort of two worlds going on, but the worlds are a little bit more fleshed out with character and more going on. The other thing that's very common in haiku, of course, is the season word is central to that tradition. There are whole dictionaries where like almost everything relates to a certain season. And it doesn't really fit in English either, but there tends to be a seasonal element. That's not a case with tanka. You can sort of write tanka about anything and tell more of a lyric story. And that's what these do. So let's take a closer look at the first one. Analyzing the wine, my friend wants to see haiku. I open the window. And so here we have a direct cut, which can, you talked about that overlap, that pivot word or phrase or line being more common, I think, in tanka than haiku. But here we have a traditional haiku type cut. And it's a cut, though, in the pace of the story. Like analyzing the wine, my friend wants to see haiku. And so there's a sense of, to me, my interpretation of this is that it's someone who's going to analyze the wine in that sort of didactic way, then asked to see haiku, is going to have annoying opinions about the haiku. And so I open the window to sort of change the subject. I mean, that's my interpretation of it. But really wonderful detail here. It's not just looking at the wine, it's analyzing the wine. So we get a real sense of what's going on here. And then my friend, so we get the character, there's really two characters enter with my friend, wants to see haiku. I open the window. And then, of course, the open the window is sort of a double meaning there, because it could be I open the window to haiku. It might be that because the friend is interested in analyzing something like wine, well, let's analyze haiku too. And so I open the window into the world of haiku. So there's two ways to take that, which is sort of makes it kind of funny. Like a lot of humor is like, the way it plays with expectation. And I think you can see it both ways, which makes that tanka nice to me. I like it. Trying to think. Well, before we move on, we'll see if anybody has any thoughts on this. I don't know what anything I'd change. I like, I could see possibly a little more detail to the friend. I'm not sure what, but there feels like maybe a bit of room to see a little bit more detail there. Analyzing the wine, I don't know what I'm being drawn toward, but I'm sort of being drawn to something maybe as an adjective. It's not often that adjectives work in a poem. We talked about that a little bit with, I think, Ori Feinberg on the Rattlecast this week. But when you have a certain perfectly placed one detail, it can really make the poem come to life. You don't want too many because it's just overdoing it. And it's really not as strong as having one. And I feel like there could be one detail there that might make the poem come to life a little bit more. But I like the structure and the movement of it. And I think it works. Let's see. Yeah. So Jamie Thomas says, I'm so impressed. I'm having a hard time coming up with a good enough compliment. Yeah. Brandon Sullivan says, in the first one, could my friend become more of a hinge? Like analyzing the wine, my friend haiku, open the window. Yeah, I wonder if you'd have more play there. But I think that it works, because of the suddenness. Like you analyzing the wine, and that could mean a lot of things. It could mean we've drunk too much of the wine too. And my friend wants to see. There's almost like a trailing off. Like, what would you want to see? And it's not there, but you imagine other things that the friend could want to see, right? When they're analyzing wine, maybe it's more than a friend or someone who wants to be more than a friend. There's a lot kind of going on there. And then it comes to haiku, which is a bit of a surprise. And then the open the window is such a turn that I think it works well juxtaposed that way. Dick Westheimer puts it this way, which I like a lot. I open the window as leading the friend to experience rather than analysis. Yeah, I like that. I like that interpretation. And it's one of those poems, and which really the fun thing about these short forms, the Japanese forms especially, but there's other short forms of poetry, is they often leave themselves really open to different interpretations, and you can read them and see them in different ways, and they're a lot of fun. And I think I agree with that too. There's a lot of readings into this, and it's fun to ponder which sort of one you meant, or maybe they mean them all at the same time. So it's really fun. Monica Dobas' question, is there a narrative spine in tanka? Are we supposed to read them independently? Well, each tanka is independent. There's also something called tanka prose, which is the same thing as Haiben, except for it has tanka at the end instead of prose. Their tanka series, this is not a tanka sequence as far as I know. Sharon didn't point it out to be such, but maybe they go together in a way that they would. I mean, Sharon's had a lot of haiku sequences, including the one in the current issue of Rattle. Another one of the masters of haiku is Mariko Kitakubo, who has had, or I shouldn't say haiku, of tanka. The other thing about the tradition of haiku and tanka is that it tends to be that a poet is either a tanka poet or a haiku poet, but not really both. There's not a lot of overlap in Japan. And one of the best contemporary tanka poets in Japan, and her mission, she read at our poetry series like 10 years ago with Deborah P. Kalaji, who unfortunately passed away recently. But her mission sort of in life, Mariko's, is to make tanka as popular in the West as haiku. So she speaks, of course, she writes in Japanese, but then translates a lot of her tanka work into English so you can read and experience it. So see a few examples really quickly of hers. So here's Mariko Kitakubo, and this is a pair with a haiku along with Deborah Kalaji for a collaboration issue. But just look at the tanka first. Through the distorted glass, he smiles to me from the white limousine. So you kind of have, it's not really a sequence because the story is within the tanka itself. Let me see what else we had. I think she had, yeah, so another one, this is from issue number, this is from the Japanese Forms issue. So this is a tanka sequence, and this is what I was trying to pull up. But so you can have a sequence like this, but you'll see each tanka sort of exists individually around the topic, which is after Fukushima. Okay, so here, I'll just read them, then we'll go back to Sharon's. But again, Mariko Kitakubo. When will my later years start? A mother cat has babies at the ruined village. Dim light of cherry blossoms, unstoppable petal storms in the ruins beyond my 5 senses. The sounds of the steam in my homeland, strontium is soaking into the placenta. You know, so you have here again, like we have with the with Sharon's haiku cut, we have an actual cut. In the Japanese, that's actually a word. That the kirigi is actually a word that you utter for punctuation. In English, it's just a dash and a break in the syntax of the sentence, because we're much more syntax and rhythm related than we are and stress related than the Japanese. But you see the same kind of structure as we had with Sharon's over here with the dash, and the way that those two separate, even though strontium soaking into the placenta is a very powerful thing to think about. And of course, it's strontium 44 or whatever that is. It's a radioactive isotope released in Fukushima. And then we have sounds of the steam in my homeland. And so we have the sounds of the steam juxtaposed with that. So it's a very haiku-like thing, except we have the context of Fukushima, and we have sort of a story playing out over time, too, if that makes sense. Anyway, Cherry Avenue, my late mother's favorite. Is there another world? Petal drift. Sorry, I read that poorly. Cherry Avenue, my late mother's favorite. Is there another world? Petal drift. And so here we have, and it's a really tight, concise story with only the details that matter, but it's there. There were days when I had my dream. Are you there now, Beetlejuice? So there you go. So another sense of some more haiku. And a poet, if you're interested, look up the work of Mariko Kitakubo. A lot of times Deborah Kalaji would translate her tanka too with her. And so we really get a sense of what it was doing in the Japanese too. Anyway, back to Sharon's. So I don't know. To me, I wouldn't change. If you have any suggestions for changing any of these, just because I like it as is, don't worry. Give her some suggestions. But I like that how it is right now. Let's see the second one. I wonder, does she save for tomorrow the black butterfly on a thistle? And this is another one like we saw with Marika's, who, there's a real clear cut. I wonder, does she save for tomorrow the black butterfly on thistle? And there's that thought. I mean, there's the one, the feeling from a lot of Japanese poetry. There's an experience called ma, which is sort of like the sublime or something. It's that sound where you're at a poetry reading, and everybody in the audience spontaneously says and that is sort of this hard to translate word from the Japanese called ma, and I think this poem has a lot of that ma feeling. It's hard to articulate. I wonder that and so unlike the haiku, we could redo this, contemplating tomorrow the black butterfly on thistle, and that would work as a haiku. But here so we have that room to be a little more lyric and have the character fill in. And so we have an actual person watching the black butterfly on thistle, wondering about tomorrow in the future and how that plays, and how in nature animals don't. So this is really lovely too. I wonder, does she save for tomorrow the black butterfly on thistle? And the black butterfly, I mean, that's one of those great little details. The butterfly on thistle wouldn't work as well. We get the B sound, so it's linguistically really nice. But then also it's a detail that makes it sort of stand out a little more, is an image. So I think nicely done too. And by having that eye there, we get more of a story. So anyway, I don't know. I wouldn't change that one either. Tanka number 3. I watch you build your room to soft jazz, smooth the dance of a red spider. So for this one, we talked about, and Brian O'Sullivan mentioned with an earlier one about making a hinge. This one, I think the first two are really great, and I wouldn't change it all. This one, I wonder if we could rephrase a little bit to make it more startling. We have that concept of soft jazz, the smooth jazz. But I wonder if there's just a way that we could build that around without having a dash to make the poem. I'm not sure exactly what you could do. I watch you build your room to soft jazz. Smooth the dance could. I don't know. I feel like this one isn't quite. I like the concept. I like. What's going on in the poem. But I think it could be tighter in a way that pivots a little bit more, that makes the poem sort of jump out. So how could you, I watch you build your room to soft jazz. I don't know. I feel like we're missing some way to connect the jazz to the spider. I don't think Smooth does it. And Smooth the dance feels a little clunky to me. Yeah, so that's one of these ones I'm not sure exactly what to do. I can point out the place where the poem could be better, but I can't generate on the fly what exactly it would be, if that makes sense. But I think here, that's one I would work on, just in that little spot. Let me see what people are saying about the... Yeah, JB says tap dance of the red spider. That's interesting. A spin. Monica Doba says actually like smooth the jazz, turning the adjective to a verb. Cindy Gutman says frantic the dance. Darian Mancito says, what does it mean to build the room? Well, the spider's building, the room within the house that is the spider's web. And so that's why it's the spider's room, which is a bit of a turn. You don't expect it to be that. Jamie Thomas says, soothe the dance. Works better. Patty Eber says, feels like a mother watching a teenager who is the red spider. I wonder if you could condense more into the poem. Could you get both the spider and the teenager in some way? Well, Brian O'Sullivan agrees with Monica that smooth here works as a creative verb. Yeah. James Spencer says tarantella of. What I wanted to do was something a little more direct. I completely change the structure, and have somehow, so it feels like one sentence, like those the pivot we talked about here with the crop. Let me see if there's another example that I can show. Oop, no. Yeah. Hang on one second. Maybe I'll pull up another one. I'm just flipping through. We had, yeah. So, okay, here's another one. This is from the Tribute to Canadian Poets, way back in summer 2011. Here's another tanka. To see kind of what I'm thinking about for this jazz, right? The day after he died, she started to wear his old sweater, the bottom edge unraveling. And so we have the sweater. It can be the bottom edge of the sweater unraveling or the bottom edge of life unraveling. And so we have that way that the poem sort of forks in the road. And the thing with this poem that feels like it's just not, it's interesting, but it doesn't push as far as it could, I think. And if the poem, wrong way. If the poem somehow forked where the jazz, we could stay with the jazz or we could go to the red spider. What if it was the soft jazz, I watch you build your room to the soft, I don't know. What if it could be I like the daughter idea. What if it was the soft jazz of the red spider and then the daughter pulled in too? Or, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure. I feel like there's more that could be done. And that's all I can really say. Let me see if there's any other comments. I'll look over on... Yeah, Jenny Milton's a smooth jazz is an idiom, though. And yeah, I think that's the case. I mean, obviously it's the case. But, like, how can you pull that in so it's like one sentence where it swings around, you know... I don't know. I feel like there's something right there that if we could just like unleash it, it would work. So what if it was like, you know, smooth jazz and then somehow the dance played out? I don't know. Margaret Doyle says jazz dance of a red spider and then change the line above it. Yeah, I don't know. This is one I would play with. And one of the things, you know, I see out of the corner of my eye, Katie sometimes, she'll be writing haiku and she'll write like 15 of them before she figures out what to put at the end of a haibin. And that's one of those cases. You just kind of iterate and play with it and see where it takes you. I love the concept and love most of the lines. I think it could do more. Jenny Milton says, Billy's jazz builds a room. That's interesting. Yeah. Okay. It swings the dance. The swing could be played in too. Yeah. Sharon Ferrante says, the spider problem rejected twice. Yeah, keep spinning, says Monica Dovos. That's great. Yeah, I'm not sure. I feel like it's almost there. Okay. Let's read the last one. An antique rose, but then the turning point, she grabs the scarlet dress. An antique rose, but then the turning point, she grabs the scarlet dress. And so you can imagine the story very obviously playing out here, right? An antique rose, like, being classy, sort of, but then the turning point, and then a sort of a second cut almost with the second line, she grabs the scarlet dress. So that one I like too, an antique rose. And then I think the antique rose has sort of double meanings too. Talking about aging and stuff. Yeah. I mean, to me, I imagine it as some kind of, accessory. I wonder what it would come up if you put, I mean, let me see. Like some kind of like brooch or earrings. There's examples like this. That's what I'm imagining. As a sort of older, classy thing, but then we grab the scarlet dress instead. And then there being like, what is that turning point? And I think that plays with that concept really nicely. That sense of it reminds me too of my favorite concrete minimalist poem is Aram Saroyan's a shadow creeping through the garden, a cat. And there's that sense of where the shadow that you don't know and is a little menacing just becomes a cat mid-sentence, and there's something about that turning point of your thoughts about the evening that I think is played out well in a tiny little story there. So to me, that works too. Let me see if there's any other comments from anybody. Dick Westermer says, question, is the poet present or mostly absent in these kinds of forms? And the poet is much more present. That's why it's sort of much more like lyric poetry. And, that lyric eye. In a lot of Sharon's poems, if you look back at, like, most of the poems we shared, Mariko, they have that sense of the speaker anyway. It might not be the poet themselves, but that same concept of the eye coming in. And I think, even where there's no I here, there's still a perspective that feels that way too. And so I think in these, because you have more of a structure like that and with more character and emotion directly stated, where it's not just two images smushed together to form that sort of feeling of, creative juxtaposition energy, you have more of a story told with more of a character. So you do have the the I coming in now. Yeah. Yeah, Andy Blanchard said, I think she went from choosing something demure to choosing something sassy. Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying. Mm-hmm. Amy Dower Solorzano says, an antique rose could also be the color of another dress option. Yeah, that's a great point, too. Yeah. Yeah, so... Yeah, Katie Dozier says, these are so great, I wish I could offer anything helpful. And, I think to Katie earlier today, Sharon said that these were rejected, or a few of them were rejected before. Which goes to show you, the editors don't know what they're doing, because these are good. The one that I think could work, I think this is still good. It's interesting. I don't feel like it wastes my time reading it. I enjoyed it. I feel like it could be better. I think I could do a little bit more. But the other three, I don't think I'd change. And so just because they're rejected from a magazine, like, who cares? Like, I mean, you do when you're reading through poem after poem after poem, you miss things. And although, I mean, we try to do it in a way, and I assume most people do it, where you kind of, anything that's potential you pull out to read more closely later, and so you tend to not miss things that way. And I assume that's how most people do it. But things are just missed, and some people don't understand tanka if it's not a haiku community type journal. That could be an issue. Could be similar to something else they published recently. We love that Michael Dillon Welch's concept of the déjà vu, where in such a short space as haiku and tanka in these short forms, there's a way that we sort of have poems without realizing it that are similar to other poems, and if the editor published one recently that was kind of similar, maybe that's why it didn't work. You just can't put too much stock into whether a poem is accepted or not. Which is why the critique of the week is so important, because we're sitting here talking about it in a way that poems never get this attention. It's not, just a thumbs up, thumbs down from Caesar. It doesn't really give you much to go on. And so if we talk about it a lot, though. But I do think this poem could be strengthened. But otherwise, I like the other three. Let me see if there's anything else. Yeah. For this last one... where was that? I just saw it. I was like, Tom Barlow says grabs is the perfect word. Yeah. Every word is so crucial in these. And yeah, that's the case too. Another one I thought was great. Yeah. Here, does she save for tomorrow? We could have used other things, other concepts. But saving is a very specific word. I think that makes the word, the poem really work because it's saving for tomorrow, not just like, does she think about tomorrow? Does she save for tomorrow? And of course, that the answer is no. So anyway, so every word really crucial. And I think one of the things that makes Sharon so great at these short forms is because she does pay attention to every single word. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's all we can do. But thanks, Sharon. It was really fun. I saw these tanka and I wanted to talk about them because we've done 300, 400 of these critique of the weeks, and I don't think we've ever talked about tanka in any depth. We might have had one at one point, I think, if I recall, but I don't think we talked about it in length. Yeah. Chelsea McClellan says, if the time allows, how does the tanka relate to renga? Is it haiku and couplet within the tanka or not necessary? Yeah, see, these things all emerged from a similar sort of literary landscape. In the haiku, what Basho really did is took the renga, took those three lines from that alternating between three lines and two, going back and forth as like a game around a table, and he made those stand out on their own as individual poems for the first time. And say, you can write a 3-line, like a little short 575 own, not syllable own, poem, and have it be a full, complete experience. Look at this. And that's what Basho really did when he invented the haiku. And so they're all interrelated because they all come out of that same thing in the same way variations on sonnets come out, or, all these different things are related in the history of, English language poetry. And so they're related. But the tanka is the oldest, really, because it comes from Waka, which dates back that far. So, I mean, that's dating back to like 700 AD or something like that for for how long this form has been around. And it was this form shortened and mixed in different ways that sort of built the other entire tradition, as I understand it anyway. I'm not a scholar of it. I've just read a lot. Okay. Are there punctuation in Tanka since Winston Munn and rules for punctuation? Mostly not, but like anything else, you can use whatever you want to make an interesting experience. So for the most Tanka you'll see, I think most of the ones I shared from Rattle don't have any punctuation, except for question marks or dashes, M dashes. I don't think we have any others. Here's one more. I think it's one of the only ones I hadn't read. This is George Swede, and here's his Tanka. He had a series of different poems. Here is George Swede's Tanka from Rattle. Night hurrying down the mountainside to work as shadows for the day. I re-knot my tie, sorry. Night hurrying down the mountainside to work as shadows for the day. I re-knot my tie. There's also, this is one of my favorite ones. Only an eternal present jackhammer. I really like that. Anyway, that is some Tanka, and thanks. That was Sharon Ferrante, of course, with the 4 Tanka. Also, we looked at some really full of meaning poems. A lot going on there by Laura Buxbaum, The Diminishment and Recipes. So thanks for sharing those. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. It's been a lot of fun, as it always is. Now, this week on the Rattlecast, coming up, we are going to have Dorianne Lux. Now, Dorianne has a whole new book of craft essays called Finger Exercises for Poets. A lot of wonderful poems she has in there and a lot of great points she makes and really accessible essays. Dorianne is one of the best craft book authors. She's also with Kim Ananicio, the co-author of The Poet's Companion, and she puts all that talent to use with this new book called Finger Exercises for Poets. She also has a new book of individual poems, and that one is called Life on Earth. Am I getting that right? Life on Earth. That just came out in January. So she's going to read poems from Life on Earth. We're going to talk about some of the topics from Finger Exercises for Poets. The prompt for this week was to write a persona prose poem. So we talked about prose poems last week with Ori Feinberg. The prompt for this week was to write that persona prose poem set in the future. So make it kind of futuristic in some way. Make it a prose poem. If you're curious about prose poems, Katie and I and the rest of the Poetry Space squad just had an episode that just released. So if you type in Poetry Space on iTunes or Spotify or any of those places, there's a nice hour-long episode featuring Kathleen Maguki, another prose poet that we've published in Rattle in the past. She has like 4 books of nothing but prose poems. She's a real expert in that subject. We share a whole bunch, talk about the history of prose poems, and give some suggestions for how to tackle them. So listen to that before you write your prose persona poem set in the future for this week's prompt. All of that is, I forgot the music. We want the music to play in the background while I say all this because I don't have to cut it for the radio show. So, all that's coming up, Rattlecast 261 with Dorianne Lux. That's this Sunday, September 8th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope you have a great weekend in the meantime. Hope good luck writing those prose poems and check out that Poetry Space. And we'll talk to you later. Goodbye.